affected by the investment that we were making in the homes. It was the homelessness. So as we began to take over and purchase every vacant flop house that we could to sort of stabilize the existing housing stock, we found that there were dozens of families that had been living in those homes without permit, without, they were just vacant buildings. And so what do you do with these people? Was not, that original idea was never part of our planning. So we had to quickly adjust and create a plan for the people that we were then displacing, not the people who own the homes, but the people who had began to take over the vacant homes. What that means is we got lucky in the sense that the crime in Fountain Park really was not coming from homeowners. It was coming from people who had moved into a community that for over 30 years had just been neglected and abandoned and disinvested in. So that's a very unique and special challenge, because you have to then not only invest in brick and mortar, you have to begin to invest in people. Next slide. So we are 207 acres of community. That goes from Delmar, Kings Highway, Page to Taylor. A lot of housing stock for a first-time developer. The reason why we worked so hard to get master development rights was not to try and eat an elephant this large at one time. It was so that we can control what happens while we make our investment. If we did not have control over the neighborhood, the moment we started making an investment in Fountain Park, we will have no control over those who were buying LRA properties just to flip them or turn them into boarding houses, those who were not engaged with the community, those who were not interested in seeing the long-term value of putting single-family homeowners in it. You'll find that a lot of the vacant and really dilapidated houses in communities like Fountain Park are really owned by out-of-state real estate investors who have no interest in how their properties are affecting the neighbors that surround them, because in some cases, you can make up to $1,000 per room in a home the size of the homes in Fountain Park. And you're talking about 4 and 5 bedroom homes that were built the same time as the homes in the Central West End. So we divided the area into 14 mixed-use sub-projects that could be taken on not only by us, but any developer who is interested in sustainable communities. And that includes an 11-acre affordable housing community, converting an old school building into a senior center. We're working on the old Euclid School, and about 14 different areas of affordable housing in 1 or 2 blocks, which is actually going to be market rate 3 or 4 years down the line. We intentionally source as many minority and local neighborhood contractors as available. That's not only good practice, that's actually smart. You'll find a lot of the people that live in the community have relationships with some of the homeless and some of the people who are going to be your number one looters and people who break into the properties as you start to invest into them. So if you're just outsiders and you're coming into a community, even though you think you're doing good, there are people who have been sitting around for years, starving, waiting on something to happen. And the moment you start to make something happen and you do not have a relationship with those people, they have no issue at all taking whatever you put in the home out. But when you get them involved and they're working and a part of the community moving forward, we found that even some of the, let's just say, more transitional people in the community who historically have not had the community's best interest in mind really get on board and start to be supportive, because they're now a part of a community that they can be, that they can take pride with. So finally, we focused on the redevelopment of specific projects. So what are the projects that we could create for this community that made sense now and also would make sense 10 years from now? And that's how you create wealth in the community. You don't just say, all right, well, we own all these properties and we're commercially zoned, so let's throw gas stations and pawn shops everywhere because it's a money grab. We really had to purchase a lot of land and sit on it for years in order to find the right projects that made sense for those properties, because they had to make sense not only for us as investors, they also had to make sense 10 years from now, you know, and that means trying to wait and hold out to see if you can land a Jamba Juice, to see if you can land a UPS store, which is very difficult to do in a community that's on the mend. Next slide. Our commercial zone is probably what a lot of folks have seen a lot of press about lately. And that's basically, you're looking at the block of Delmar from Kings Highway to Taylor. So the development area is completely zoned all the way around. And when we first got started, we actually thought it would be a good idea to start on Kings Highway because it was already dense commercially. And that's where a lot of the SBD taxes were coming from. But Kings Highway was a mess. There's a lot of properties that are owned by different owners who do not live or have any other investment in the community. Therefore, they don't keep them up. They aren't a part of the business district. They're just there to make money. So it would be very difficult to create any kind of continuity along along Kings Highway, even though to me, I think long-term, Kings Highway has the potential to look more like Cherokee. Cherokee is one of my favorite streets. It has a lot of small family-owned businesses that are well kept, and a lot of the people in the community own those businesses, and they therefore reinvest a lot of their time and energy in making sure that they are safe and very welcoming to customers. And that, I think, is the 3 or 4 year plan for Kings Highway. However, where Delmar is, we got kind of lucky in the sense that there are a lot of vacant parcels that were abandoned. That means that we now don't have to displace anything. We don't have to displace anyone. All we have to do is create infill for Delmar. So with that, we created an application for a TIF. That TIF is up for its final hearing December 9th. I think we're looking pretty good. If we're able to land that TIF, we're then able to improve the infrastructure of Delmar. That will include everything from cameras, safety, tree line, lighting, curb cuts. We have to slow traffic down, water runoff. Everything on Delmar will be supported through this TIF. But most excitingly are the projects that we created specifically to help grow this community. The main one of which we're going to talk about in 1 second, but I just want to give an honorable mention to 2 others. Where you see dot number 1, that's the old bank building at, I believe it's 4915 Delmar. And we're turning that into a performing arts theater for young people to give young folks something creative to do with their time. So it'll operate sort of like a mini Coca for those of you who are familiar with Coca. Number 4, which is an entire block, that's a 156 unit market rate apartment building. So that will function a little more like Chroma. Chroma is one of my favorite apartments that's been created recently in St. Louis. That's over at Manchester. It was created by Green Street, one of the companies that I kind of followed and studied as I was trying to create what I was doing here. And of course, project number 2, which is Elevation, and 3, which is the Circuit, a performing arts theater. Next slide. Raising Cain, that means raising hell. And the reason why I said it like that is because, again, when you're talking about raising money and you're talking about where that money is going to be sourced, banks are not into risk at all. They're into press. So you have to be able to understand that we had to create projects that were so compelling. It wasn't so much about getting you to support them because we were community activists or we were trying to create something that just made good sense. We also wanted to make good business sense. So what could we create that not only could be profitable, but also be transformative for our community? So we knew getting started, we would have to raise, or I would have to raise, at least about $500,000 just to prepare for the soft costs. So for those of you who are interested in the fun part of this conversation, we're kind of getting to it now. You got to ask yourself, can you raise $500,000? Friends, family, second mortgage on your home. Can you write a grant? You got to get started with those soft costs, or you will not have the money to even pay for your architectural renderings, which is going to communicate to the city exactly what your project is that you're trying to create. Next slide. So that's the Elevation Workspace building. What's interesting is we actually started to do a building from the ground up at the corner of Delmar and Taylor. That building when we first got started wasn't even available. But what we knew was we wanted to create a co-working space, a hub that would create a place for young people to come and learn how to be entrepreneurs, but more importantly, entrepreneurs who are interested in working or making their money in underserved communities. That was the goal and the purpose of that building. The original building we were going to construct from the ground up was $15 million, but we couldn't do the land assemblage because one of the challenges that you find as a developer is once you make the announcement that you got all these big old plans for the community, everyone that was sitting on land before that was worthless, your price just went up. So now you got property that may have been worth $50,000 before you made your fancy announcement. Now people want $500,000, $2 million. And you cannot go into a project upside down. You will effectively be giving the seller the profit for your next 3 or 4 years at purchase. And so you have to be a little bit patient and try and find an opportunity to find you. And with this building, it found us. So right at the moment when we were getting at our wits' end, trying to assemble the land at the corner of Delmar and Taylor, I got a call from the old president of IFF, Mr. Dave Ramirez, that building was available and it was within our price point. So we had a starting place. We were all over this building. So it's 25,000 square feet. The importance of having a building that exists is you know exactly what it's going to cost now. So if it's 25,000 square feet, you can just about multiply that by, let's say, $200, and that's going to give you your square foot cost to rehab that building. So that's going to put you right around $5 million, and you know that that's your base. That is not what's called FF&E, furniture, fixtures, and what is it? Exterior, furniture, fixture, and something else. Carl will correct me in a moment. But in any way, that's basically your equipment. There it is. Thank you. That's that interior part of your building that's going to make the difference between you just painting it and you turning it into Cortex. The importance of you turning it into Cortex, which is a beautiful building, is when you're trying to get people to have office space, they have choices. So if I wanted to move my office space, I started this conversation saying, I was thinking about leaving the neighborhood. Why would I go 2 blocks over to office in the flea market? So you got to be able to create something that's important, that's beautiful, that's transformative, but it costs you money. So with that building, we knew if $5 million was the base, was the floor, by the time you add experience, by the time you add soft costs, financing, you know, all the other little intangibles that are part of a reconstruction loan, you're probably going to be at about 6.5. So that put us at 6.2. Next slide. All right, so that speaks a little more about what that building is, as well as the vision for it. So what that project became was a project that we knew we didn't have a lot of time to create a gigantic co-working space because co-working was quickly becoming oversaturated. And even though we thought that was a great idea 6 years ago, within the last 6 years, we've seen one of the co-working juggernauts almost file for bankruptcy and be a thing of the past. We watched all of the other wonderful co-working spaces that we have in St. Louis kind of get in competition with each other and oversaturated. So we had to kind of create something that was the next level of co-working, and it ended up boiling back down to office space, but office space that was supportive of everyone in there that were interested in being entrepreneurs. So we created a space that would have weekly classes that supported entrepreneurship, weekly classes that supported everything from marketing, sales, advertising, guest speakers. We created a space for you to have lectures, halls to rent, all the amenities you could imagine. We stuffed in this building, but most importantly, the retail space at the bottom, we also invested in. So I invested in the UPS store, Jamba Juice, and a small franchise called the Original Hot Dog Factory. The reason why I invested in those now is because now we have training ground for entrepreneurs. We're not just teaching young people or anyone who wanted to work there how to make a smoothie or a hot dog. We're teaching you to run those businesses. The purpose of those are not just to be retail, but also to train anyone who's interested in running businesses how to run a business. So if your office is upstairs or if you lived in the community, you can come work there just for a week, a month, however long, just to kind of get the feel for how to run a business. We're going to be a little slow to let you on the cash register, but you can run every other part of the business that you may be interested in. Next slide. So what sources were available that we used to put it together? Those are generically the sources that's going to be available for a project like Elevation, New Market Tax Credits, PAYS, Brownsfield, Developers Equity, of course, which I brought to the table. We knew we would need a leveraged loan, historic tax credits. MSD has grants if you're going to do anything green. So let's just kind of dig into that real quick. So the first thing we landed was a New Market Tax Credit from St. Louis Development for $6 million. So that sounds like a lot of money, but when you break that money down into how much of it translates directly to the developers use, it's really only $2 million. The other 4 goes to the investors who buy the tax credits, the accountant, the lawyers, everyone it takes to handle the administration of a $6 million tax credit. So there's really only 2. PAYS are credits that are created by the state if you're taking an old structure like a building that's 100 years old, like that one, and you're trying to make it green, which means you're going to do new windows, new lighting, new HVAC, things that are going to save on wasted energy. You can qualify for what's called a PACE loan. And we were lucky enough to find nearly $2 million in energy improvements for that building. So that was a part of our loan. Brownsfield is if you find anything that's contaminated and in an old building, chances are you're going to find lead. You're going to find, in our case, we found old what do you call them? Gigantic tanks, that's the word I'm looking for, that were in the basement that were covered with concrete. So we literally had to hire a company to dig that out, identify what it was, see if anything was contaminated in the land that was behind it, just to see if we qualified for Brownsfield, which would then therefore have enough cachet from the state to help us cover the cost of whatever it was we found. And that left us with a $2 million gap. That was the leveraged loan amount that we had to find, which was the hardest part. We found no banks that was interested in investing that $2 million into this project. It was still a project north of Delmar in an untested area. Even though we had brought to the table 3/4 of the cash, that loan was still very difficult to find. But what we got lucky at was that this was a non-for-profit led project. And that led us to IFF, or CDFI, who funds projects like that. So if you're not familiar with IFF, Illinois Facilities Fund, I would look them up. You have a non-for-profit project, they are fantastic. Next slide. So when you break down the financials and the sources and uses, that's what it looks like. So feel free to take a screenshot. You're going to need to really study that. The reason why I say that is you'll see a bunch of zeros, which were contributions that we did not get, but that doesn't mean that projects that you're working on won't qualify for them. We just did not qualify for them. We failed, the building failed to pass the historic tax credit. We didn't know why. It was a beautiful old building, but it had something to do with the interior had been changed too many times from its original historic context. So that there goes federal and state historics. Brownsfields came in at 350. We were not able to use any of the TIF because we started this project before we had enough projects sourced to put in our application for the TIF. So Of the 5 projects along Delmar, only 2 are actually going to directly benefit from the TIF, and elevation, unfortunately, is not one of them. So when you look at our final capital stack, that puts us at $6,291,000, which is the budget we have to create this project. We're actually looking to raise an additional $6 million for a performing arts theater that's going to go on the rear of this building, and we're about halfway there now. I assume we'll have that completely financed by February, and that will allow us to create what I'm about to show you now, which is a very, well, in a second, which is going to be a very exciting, transformative project for our area. Next slide. So these are our friends that helped create this project. Again, this is a few companies you may also want to take a screenshot of and get to know. Amoresco was one of the first companies that reached out to us and said, hey, not only can we help you with your design build, we can also help you raise money. They led us to Integro, which helped us land our PACE financing. IFF, of course, is the leverage loan. Emerald Capital, those are my guys, Matt Drennan and Luke Pope. They're over independently now with Emerald Capital, which is an extension of Green Street, but they handle all of our accounting, all of our new market tax credits, all those meetings that I had no history or background for. Those are the guys that handle that for you. Ballots, that's a good buddy of mine, Brian Pratt. He handles all of our TIF planning. He helps put all of these projects in context with one another so that they don't cannibalize each other, and the city are able to see that I understand how each of these subsidies that we created get paid back, because they aren't free money, they aren't grants. You do have to be accountable to those coming back where they came from, where the investors came from. Collective Work Foundation, that's my 501c3. U.S. Bank is the purchaser of the tax credits from St. Louis Development Corporation. They were the first to step up and say, we believe in this project. We have no problem investing our tax credit investors' dollars north of Delmar, because we think this project is not only sound, we think it's sustainable. Twain Capital Partners are the ones who purchased our PACE loan. And they were, again, a company not afraid to step up and invest in St. Louis, a project that was, had no precedent. $6 million project on the north side of the street of Delmar. They stepped right up. And last but not least is Casco, which is my friend Carl Carlin, who is the wonderful architect who helped us create all of these crazy ideas that I had bouncing around in my head. He's the guy who helped me bring them to life. And he's also the guy that goes back and forth with Amoresco to make sure that they're able to build everything that he and I have envisioned. So with that said, I'd like to show you a quick walkthrough or walk around of the outside of the Emerge building, the elevation building, and a walk up to the circuit. All right. And that is my story, and I'm sticking to it. So what
That
you
is
have,
fantastic.
thank you. So that is a blush of about 80, the first of $83 million worth of development that we're putting on Delmar, putting along Delmar. And it's been a lot of talented people who've helped us do it. There's absolutely nothing special about me other than I know how to pick good people to work with. Chris Mazurek, also shout out to him, who was also one of the first people who was working on $100 million projects, but thought that I had enough merit. This project had enough merit for him to direct his resources, his corporate resources, to take this project seriously. So, thank you very much, Kelly. What else would you have of me?
We did have a question come through as you were kind of walking through the businesses that are going to be in the elevation building. And the question related to, I think, the structure of your 501c3. Is that the franchisee or the franchisor, or how does that structure, how do you envision that coming together?
Okay, the 501c3 is just they run the social programming for the building. So there's the actual real estate, which is owned by Kingsway Development, which is an LLC. And then there is the operator of all the resources and all the programs that happen within the building. And you have to kind of separate those two for a variety of reasons. A lot of it has to do with the PACE investors will not invest in a 501c3. The 501c3 is the only thing that IFF would invest in, and then you have to separate the real estate from the operations. So, but no, the 501c3 basically just runs the program. Hi, Lisa.
Very good. And you didn't give a shout out to your lawyers, but I'm sure you have really good advice that's helping you kind of navigate this dance, because it sounds like it is
Brian Weaver,
more than a little complicated.
Brian Weaver, David Sweeney, they're all fantastic. And again, they have taken the time to invest in this project because they believe in it, not just because they didn't have other $1 million clients to attend to. As far as COVID, can I just answer directly to these?
Yeah,
okay,
go for it.
So as far as COVID, it really helped us in the sense that we thought we would be open last year. But what happened was we had a drag in our leverage lender. We originally had a leverage lender that rocked us to sleep. We thought we had all the money we needed to get started. Then they didn't fund. And so we wasted an entire year doing nothing because they kept saying, well, this month we're going to close, this month we're going to close. And they ended up not closing. But had they closed, we in 2019, we would have opened in 2020, meaning we would have opened in a pandemic. So God is good. So we moved on, and now we should be opening in 2021, hopefully clear of COVID. If not, definitely with some boundaries as to how we navigate with this virus as a part of our lives now. As far as how it affected the performance, it actually saved us a little money. On the pay side, that money comes from the state, and that the Fed rates dropped on that money. So it ended up saving us nearly $200,000 or $300,000 because the Fed rates dropped on that money. So again, COVID to a good degree has not hurt us. I won't say it was a blessing, but we did manage to come out the other side a little better. So who owns the franchise? Kingsway Development owns the franchises. Those franchises were bought basically by my company personally. It was not easy trying to convince UPS Store, especially Jamba, to allow a franchise to be bought by a developer who's developing and building in an area that is nowhere near where their client base is. But again, we've had a lot of good fortune, including press that helped. And Jamba, for instance, basically said, well, you know what? We want to be a part of this story. We want to be a part of you transforming this neighborhood. So we'll allow you to purchase this franchise as long as you have an operator. So we then had to hire a separate operator who would be essentially the, well, not owner, but the operator of the Jamba Juice. That person is going to train, run, and manage the Jamba Juice for Kingsway Development, because of course I will not have the time to. So what was your inspiration for becoming a real estate developer? I actually backed into it. Originally, I was just pressuring SLDC to do something about Fountain Park. That's all I was doing. I wanted my office to not have to move. I wanted that community that sat behind me, that beautiful neighborhood, to have some of the same investment from the city that I saw happening on other projects that I personally was a part of with the city. And basically they said, well, if you're so smart, why don't you do something about it? And they asked me to chair, actually first, to sit on the board of the SBD at the time, the Special Business District that collected the tax. So in 2014, I sat on the board for about 6 months, but it was really just doing nothing. It did nothing, I thought, in my humble opinion, that was drawing young businesses north of Delmar. So I resigned. 2 years later, I got a call in 2016 saying, not only after I left did the board become defunct, but the taxes continued to be collected. So they asked me, would I chair a new board, hire, attract new board members, and then come up with a plan for the area? And that's what became the Kingsway Development Plan. So we created a new board. I said the only way I'd do it would be if I could take whatever was in that treasury, whatever it was, match it with my own money, and hire the best architects, the best planners I could, and create a plan for Fountain Park. But I had no desire to manage a tax that was not going to be transformative for the area. So that led to the board supporting me to go after the creation of a development plan. Once the development plan was created, we submitted it to the alderman. That development plan did not have a developer. So when we submitted the development plan to the alderman and the area became blighted, I had the opportunity to be the developer. So for me, it was a very exciting opportunity, but it was also a crossroads, because I knew then it would take me away from my core of what I did, which was marketing. And I love marketing, I love advertising, but the opportunity to lead development and be a transformative brick and mortar part of a community, I could not resist. And I've been in love with learning everything about development ever since. And I've been very fortunate to be successful. Were there any existing neighborhood associations you needed to convince? Yes, all of them. Because who was I? One of the first things, one of the first challenges was who did I work for? People were trying to figure out if I was a shield for Paul McKee, if I worked for the Central West End and I was a ploy, and all. I was a bad guy for about 6 months, but it takes a lot of community engagement. You have to continue to convince the community that you're on their side. So one of the first things that I did that helped me, and this was thanks to advice I got from WashU, was to create a housing board that allowed all those existing organizations to operate under one umbrella, because they were fighting amongst themselves. So there was a lot of little fiefdoms that was in the community that prevented them from having a unified plan. But by creating one housing board, no one had to leave their organizations, but they can all participate under this one umbrella for the sole purpose of being a part of whatever moved this community forward. So that was kind of how I got the community to trust me. Now that housing board has been turned over to the community. It's being ran by a young man named Chauncey Nelson, and the vice president is Vontrice McNeil. And they're outstanding. Chauncey is a Brown School graduate from WashU who knew we had that level of talent in Fountain Park. Vontrice just went to work for, I can't think of the organization. It'll come to me in a minute. Invest STL. And I think, again, that's another coup. because Invest STL is doing a lot to invest in our communities, and to have 2 members of our neighborhood association be a part of those 2 organizations is just, again, a fantastic blessing for moving forward. And it looks like one last one. It sounds like you had to convince these franchise companies to open in your development. What made you choose those specific brands? So UPS store was something that I needed within that building because we knew we couldn't afford to have a separate copy room to facilitate copies and faxes and IT for the businesses. But by purchasing a franchise or getting the UPS store there, we knew that those services then could be handled professionally. And at the same time, there's always a need for mail and mailboxes, not just for the offices that are within the building, but also people in the community who want to receive everything from their personal mail to their Amazon packages because they're getting stolen off the front porches. And having a central place for those businesses to handle that professionally and have it in-house, UPS store was just the best option. Jamba Juice, I'm just a fan. We started out with Smoothie King. We looked at about 4 other smoothie spots, and what we wanted was some place that was kind of young and energetic, that wasn't burnt out in St. Louis, that would service not only the people that would be in that building, but also right next door, we got Launch Code. Jim McKelvey just put it he just announced another $5 million he's putting into that building. So you have all these young bodies and young stomachs. We want to create someplace young and hip where they can come get a snack and a smoothie, and Jamba Juice won. The original hot dog factory, kind of the same thinking as Jamba Juice, in that I was looking for a young franchise where you can get some grab and go food. I saw these guys on the internet out of Atlanta, and their social media was just on fire with activities, and it was really fun. And they created all these little gourmet hot dogs. So I flew to Atlanta to meet them, to try and get to know their personality and who they were. And we just kind of fell in love with each other. They loved the idea of what I was doing. In fact, they said, we like what you're doing so much. We not only want to support a franchise in your location, we're going to give you franchise rights from Missouri to Kansas City. So anyone who's interested in purchasing our franchise still has to be trained on Delmar. And that furthers your initiative and everything that you're trying to create. So again, we could have just grabbed anything and filled those spaces, but we wanted that kind of energy from the franchises that were going to those buildings because we want that to be interactive. Did you learn any lessons from the redevelopment of the old Sears building on North Kings Highway that was developed by the Robert brothers? It does not seem to be sustained. Yeah, absolutely. Don't do that. So we don't want no parts of that. So I'm excited, though, that the Urban League just purchased that building, and they're going to put about $10 million into that building. That building sits just on the north side of my development area. My original vision was to clear that whole area. We had began early talks with Walmart and Home Depot. So we were going to create a big box on that land, which would represent jobs and taxes. But we were outmaneuvered by Urban League, who was ready to go right now and wanted to make that their headquarters. So although we didn't have time to cultivate the Home Depot or the Menards, I think the Urban League is a hell of a consolation prize. Mike McMillan is outstanding. And so I think he's going to be able to help us also connect with residents better with all the sustainable things that they provide in between the development of the housing and social services. So parking is being addressed across the street. We're creating a 3-level garage. It's a part of the apartment building. I knew that this would run long, so I didn't include that. But if you go to SLDC, you can SLDC's website, you can actually download the Kingsway TIF plan, and you'll see a big, beautiful apartment building, and there's a 3-level garage at the end directly across the street. All of that comes with the improvements that are going along Delmar. So that's a $43 million project. All right, and You got to let me know when to stop answering questions because I'll keep going. What's the cost per space? Well, we're doing $2 a square foot. We probably could have got more, but it would have defeated our purpose. I still wanted to make this a very mission-oriented business. We're not really in this for the profit. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but we're trying to do good work. The only thing that can get you motivated to take as many slings and arrows as you're going to take if you take on a project like this is you really have to be about a mission. And so for me, being about the mission of creating entrepreneurs and creating this level of energy and excitement in our community, we'll take 50 cents or a dollar less per square foot because our performance still works. How are you making money? Well, that remains to be seen. So the developer fee in the project, if you put together any $1 million project, you are entitled to a developer fee of up to 5%. But if you're a first-time developer, usually they're going to want, whoever the lender is, they're going to want you to leave that in the project because they just don't want the first-time guy walking away with a big old chunk of money. You will not see this on larger developments. You'll only see this as the first-time developer. But my workaround, because this is chess, not checkers, was to take that developer fee and allow it to sit in escrow to support the franchises. So each franchise requires operating capital. So since you would not give me the right to my own developer fee, would you put it in escrow to support the franchises? So now we have $400,000 to support the franchises, which is more than enough money if we don't sell one hot dog smoothie or mail one package at UPS to still sustain and pay rent. All right. I think that's it.
So I am going to take a little privilege here. Kevin did have one more slide that was about community impacts. And if you're okay with me sharing that slide, I'm a visual person, so I know a lot of this has been covered in what Kevin has talked about, and we've heard a lot of it, but just seeing it kind of listed out. Kevin, if you're okay with me sharing that, I'd like to just share that with the group.
Sure.
You can talk to those.
All right, so this speaks to the larger impact of everything that I'm doing. Again, and for time's sake, we're really only talking about elevation. But for community's sake, elevation is just a small part of 14 other projects that we're hoping to transform this community with. The social capital and community involvement to transcend what people are calling the Delmar divide is really just a lack of people finding any value in investing north of Delmar. I get it. Why take that risk? Why put $6 million north of Delmar when you can put it in U City? I got it. But it only makes sense after someone else does it. So once someone else does it and it's sustainable, then here comes the gold rush. Okay. So the Delmar divide is really just a lack of vision to me. We can get into the whole history of how it became divided. But for me, that doesn't change what we do about it right now. So we want to create a project that dealt with it right now. Establish Delmar as a dynamic public space. So what we're creating between the apartment building, elevation, the circuit, we're creating what's called the elevation district. So the street will look a little more like U City. You'll see curb cuts, places to sit outside, cameras, safety, the crosswalks at Bayard, Euclid, Walton, Taylor, all will be traffic calm, beautiful paint in the street, because we want to create this a pedestrian friendly space. We want to make this space a place that you can hang out with as an extension, if nothing else, of the Central West End. So you can walk along Delmar, make your left onto Euclid and go on down to a couple bars or pubs in the Central West End as well. Public parking, we just talked about, that's a 3-level deck across the street at Delmar and Walton. Is directly across at Bayard, the entrance point, but the driving point is at Walton. The MBA opportunities are obvious. There are a lot of really phenomenal minority-led companies in St. Louis, and most of them have to fight to participate in this project or that project. But of course, with everything we're doing, we started with those MBA companies and really gave all of them the first right of refusal to participate in any of the project. And that led us to relationships with KAI, ABNA, Kwame, a whole host of other smaller developers. ABNA is an engineering company, by the way. And they are all just phenomenal. The pricing has been great, the support has been great, et cetera. By the development of all these projects, we've created 400 employment positions. We've generated $83 million worth of new taxes, and we will continue to be an inspiration to develop things not just along Delmar, but further north as well. If we're successful, Page will be the new divide.
And while you're going through that, there were 2 more questions that came through. We have 3 minutes, so you can either answer both briefly or pick one.
I will say, so Kingsway is the name of the area. So that area that that we're working in is actually called Kingsway. It's Kingsway East and Kingsway West. So when we created the development company, the board and I, we really just created it, named it to honor the area so that if we were lucky, that name will keep getting associated with positivity. And then as far as the street infrastructure improvements, there are, if you give your email address to Kelly, there's a presentation that's coming up that we're doing publicly about street improvements that's going to get into a lot more detail than I think we have time for. But just briefly, everything from bike lanes to art on the street, traffic calming measures, because Delmar right now is a drag race. So you have to be able to slow traffic down. You also have to make it accessible on both sides of the street. MSD is involved because when you start, tearing down trees and creating concrete, you're also causing water, creating a problem with water runoff. So of the $6.5 or so million that we're looking for in the TIF, about $4 million goes directly into those improvements along Delmar. And that's everything from lighting, street, security, everything. So that's, it's a lot, but that's kind of the gist of it.
And so Kevin, you'll share that with me. I'll get it offline and share that with everybody who has been emailing me in the chat or chatting with me about that information.
Yes, it's a complete slideshow. It gets into all the details of all the specific street improvements.
Very good. Well, thank you so very much. As I mentioned earlier, the generosity with which developers have approached these Anatomy of the Deal programs has been humbling. It's fascinating. I think everybody on the call really enjoys digging into all of the details, the struggle that it takes to pull these deals together, and then certainly celebrating the accomplishment, as things progress along the way, and then certainly at groundbreaking and, frequenting your businesses as they come online. So thank you very much. We really do appreciate everything that you shared with us today and the work that you're doing in a part of town that has been long neglected and long overlooked. So we're excited about that for that area and certainly for our city. And one last plug, I'm not sleeping much these days. There's a lot going on with ULI St. Louis. So if you get a chance, check out our event page, stlewis.uli.org. There are a lot of events coming up, a book club with ULI Louisiana, where we're going to be talking about the book Evicted. We have a Market Insights program on Tuesday with the folks from PGAV Planners. There's a creative placemaking program that same day that Kevin participated in the forum that launched those sessions in July of last year up in Chicago. Oops. And then, of course, our Emerging Trends program on the 10th, and then backing up with CMT and the Realtors on the 4th, we're doing a program on TOD. So all that is to say, there's a lot of good content out there and a lot of great opportunities to learn more, to network as much as we can, but to collectively come together and see if we can't make St. Louis a stronger and more thriving community. So with that, we will sign off for today and look forward to seeing you next week, if not sooner. Thanks again, Kevin.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.